I fell for my brother's wife in Los Angeles, and it spiraled out of control. Throwaway account. I've never done this kind of thing before, but I feel like I need to confess somewhere, even if it's to strangers on the internet. I know I'm probably the worst person you've come across here, and trust me, I've thought about it 1,000 times. But sometimes the truth is just too heavy to carry alone. So here goes. Maybe you'll read this and judge me harshly, or maybe you'll see a reflection of your own past mistakes. Either way, it's time I let it out. I don't expect sympathy or understanding. I'm not even sure what I'm hoping to get from sharing this. Maybe I just need to speak the truth out loud, or at least type it, because it's been rotting away inside of me. Back in 2019, I made a desperate attempt to overhaul my life. I'd just gone through a soul-crushing divorce that left me feeling like a shell of a man, like I had lost not just a partner, but a part of my identity. Nights became endless, empty stretches of time where my thoughts seemed to echo in the silence. My apartment felt like a tomb, filled with the lingering scent of her perfume, the furniture we'd picked out together, the photographs I couldn't yet bring myself to take down. I needed to get away from it all, the familiar streets, the pitiful looks from old friends, the endless reminders of the future I'd once envisioned but would never have. Los Angeles seemed like the answer. It was a city big enough to lose myself in, a place where dreams and disasters collided every day, and I was ready for a fresh start. The city had a way of consuming you, overwhelming your senses until you were forced to either adapt or drown. That's what I was looking for, something to either break me completely or mold me into someone new. LA was this sprawling, chaotic, beautiful mess where no one asked questions and everyone had their own story to bury. It didn't matter who I had been, what mistakes I'd made. In LA, I could be whoever I wanted. I was drawn to the anonymity of it all, the idea that I could disappear into the crowd and leave my past behind. I didn't know if I was running towards something or away from everything, but I was desperate enough to try either way. My brother Ethan had been living there for years, well established and thriving. He'd built a life that looked picture perfect from the outside. A sprawling house in a sun-soaked neighborhood, 3 little girls who adored him, and a wife who, let's just say, could turn the heads of both men and women. Amanda wasn't just beautiful. She was breathtaking in that effortless, born to be the center of attention kind of way. It was as if the spotlight followed her naturally, illuminating her in a way that made everyone else seem dim by comparison. She had this energy, this glow about her that could make anyone in a room feel like they'd known her forever. It wasn't just that she was gorgeous, though believe me, she was drop-dead stunning. It was the way she seemed to draw you in, almost daring you not to notice her. She could start a conversation with a stranger at the grocery store, and within minutes, have them spilling their life story to her. Her charm was magnetic, intoxicating, and for someone like me, who was feeling lost, hollowed out, it was impossible not to be affected. She had this presence about her, this ability to make every moment feel more alive just by being in it. She would walk into a room, and the air would change, the mood would shift, and suddenly, all eyes would be on her. People were drawn to Amanda, and I was no exception. When she spoke, it was like her words were wrapped in silk, and she had this way of tilting her head when she listened to you, like she was genuinely captivated by whatever you were saying. It made you feel special, seen, even if just for a moment. But that's the thing. Those moments started to add up, and before I realized it, I was thinking about her at odd hours of the day, replaying conversations in my head. It was subtle at first, just a creeping awareness of how captivating she was. But soon I found myself craving her presence, looking forward to the next family gathering just to see her again. I didn't come to LA intending to fall for my brother's wife. In fact, when I first met Amanda, I remember thinking how lucky Ethan was. She was perfect, too perfect, really, and it never crossed my mind that someone like her would ever be anything more than family. But as the weeks rolled by, I started seeing more of Amanda, spending time with her and Ethan, helping out with the kids or joining them for dinner. It was casual, innocent, the kind of thing families do. But then there were the glances, the subtle touches, the inside jokes that seemed to be just a little bit too intimate for comfort. At first, I didn't even notice what was happening. It was like being in a fog, where you don't realize you're lost until you're completely enveloped and there's no clear path back. Our interactions started to feel different, deeper somehow. I'd catch her watching me with this curious, almost playful look, like she was silently daring me to cross a line we hadn't even acknowledged existed. There were times I'd lie awake at night, replaying our conversations, analyzing her expressions, wondering if I was just reading into things because I was lonely. It started to become routine, like an unspoken ritual we participated in. I'd show up at their house for dinner or come over to help Ethan with some project, and there would always be this undercurrent, this tension that we both felt but didn't discuss. Amanda would smile a little too long, laugh a little too hard, and I'd find myself hanging on to every word she said. I'd notice how she'd occasionally touch her hair when she was talking to me, or how she'd brush her hand against mine when she handed me something. There were moments when it felt like the room grew smaller, like everything else faded into the background and it was just the two of us. That was the scariest part, how natural it felt, how easily we fell into this rhythm that blurred the lines between right and wrong. At first, I brushed it off. I mean, come on, she was my sister-in-law. But the more time we spent together, the more it felt like there was this unspoken thing simmering between us, a secret language that only the two of us understood. Every laugh, every brush of her hand against mine, it all felt charged, like electricity just waiting to spark. And I started to notice little things about her, like how her laugh was always a bit louder when I was around, or the way her eyes seemed to linger just a second too long. I could feel this growing tension between us, an intensity that neither of us could put into words. It was as though we were dancing around a flame, circling closer and closer with each passing day, daring it to ignite. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that it was all in my head, but then there would be another glance, another lingering touch, and I'd be right back where I started, confused and craving more. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more undeniable it became. It was as if some magnetic force kept pulling us together, and the closer we got, the harder it was to resist. There were nights I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, the silence of my apartment closing in around me, and all I could think about was her. Her laugh, the way she'd look at me when no one else was paying attention. I knew it was wrong. God, did I know it. But there was this insatiable urge to be near her, to push the boundaries just a little further each time we were together. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch, a hunger I couldn't satisfy, and the more I tried to distance myself, the deeper I fell. It was a dangerous game we were playing, even if we hadn't admitted it yet. The boundaries we'd always kept intact were slowly dissolving, and it was becoming harder and harder to ignore. There was an unspoken understanding between us, and the more we flirted with it, the more thrilling and forbidden it felt. It felt like we were living on the edge of a knife, each moment precariously balanced, just waiting for the slightest nudge to tip us over. And I knew, deep down, that when that moment came, there would be no going back. That all changed on New Year's Eve. Ethan and Amanda had thrown this massive party at a friend's mansion up in the Hollywood Hills, one of those places where the view of the city is so stunning, it feels like you're on the edge of the world. The night was perfect, warm enough that the breeze felt like silk against your skin, and the champagne was flowing like water. I could feel Amanda's gaze on me from across the room. It wasn't subtle anymore, and it definitely wasn't innocent. Every time I looked her way, there she was, those green eyes glinting with something I hadn't dared name until that moment. It was like she was sending out a signal, something only I could pick up on, and it was driving me insane. I could barely focus on conversations, couldn't enjoy the music or the laughter, because all I could think about was how close she was, and how impossible it was becoming to keep pretending nothing was happening between us. Ethan, completely oblivious, kept toasting with our friends, joking about how Amanda and I got along too well. I tried to laugh it off, but a cold knot formed in my gut. Was he testing me? Did he already suspect something? I couldn't tell, and it was driving me insane. Every time I glanced in Amanda's direction, she'd give me that same look, playful, daring, almost as if she was enjoying how dangerously close we were to crossing a line we could never uncross. I found myself drifting toward her as the night wore on, the pull of whatever was between us growing stronger with every passing hour. Later that night, when the clock struck midnight and the fireworks exploded over the city, I felt Amanda's hand slide into mine for just a second. A split second that sent a shiver down my spine. It was quick, but it was enough. Enough to confirm what I had been trying to deny. Enough to tell me that the tension, the lingering stares, the subtle touches hadn't been in my head. I knew, in that moment, we'd crossed a line that we'd never be able to come back from. The heat between us was no longer imaginary. It was very real, and I could see it in her eyes every time she looked at me. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. Things got worse when we all took a family trip to Big Bear. What was supposed to be a couple of days of skiing, snowball fights, and cocoa by the fire quickly became a different kind of escape. It was like we were in our own little world, away from reality. The cabin was surrounded by towering pine trees, their snow-covered branches swaying gently in the mountain breeze. Inside, the crackling fire kept the place warm, creating this cozy, almost romantic atmosphere that seemed to draw Amanda and me closer together. It felt like fate was nudging us along, setting the scene for something that deep down we both knew was inevitable. I can still remember the way Amanda's laughter echoed across the frozen lake as we skated with the kids, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her eyes flashing with mischief. It was different from any other time I'd seen her laugh. It was carefree, untamed, like she was shedding the last bit of restraint she'd been clinging to. Every time she touched my arm or brushed up against me accidentally, it felt like a match striking, and the air around us seemed to crackle. I was hyper-aware of her every movement, and I think she knew it. The tension between us was unbearable, a living, breathing thing that neither of us could ignore anymore. It was as if the whole world had faded away, leaving just the two of us in this snow-covered wonderland, circling each other like predators on the hunt. Even the simplest moments, a shared glance across the dinner table, a lingering touch as we handed each other mugs of hot chocolate, felt heavy with meaning. And then there were the nights, when the house would fall silent, and I'd lie in bed, staring up at the ceiling, wondering if she was awake, wondering if she was thinking about me too. The first kiss happened late one night. Ethan had gone to bed after knocking back a few drinks, leaving me, Amanda, and a couple of friends still up. The kids were asleep upstairs, and the fire was dying down, casting flickering shadows around the cabin. We were outside, away from the others, watching the stars. The air was icy, our breaths visible, and she was standing so close I could see the shimmer of frost in her hair. Without even thinking, I leaned in and kissed her. Just a quick kiss, a brief touch at the corner of her lips. But God, it felt like diving headfirst into a pool of gasoline with a lit match in my hand. For a moment, I pulled back, my heart racing and my breath coming out in quick puffs that disappeared into the cold night air. I half expected her to push me away, to say something that would snap me out of whatever spell I was under. But she didn't. Instead, she closed the gap between us, her eyes searching mine. And that's when I saw it. She had been waiting for this, wanting it just as much as I had. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, a hunger, a need, and in that moment all my self-control crumbled. I kissed her again, and this time it wasn't fleeting. It was intense, filled with months of bottled-up tension and unspoken desire. From there, it was a whirlwind. Back in LA, we kept finding excuses to see each other, finding any moment we could to steal away. We'd sneak off behind Ethan's back during family outings, slipping away to my apartment or meeting up in dark corners of the city. There was a part of me that felt disgusted, like I was betraying the person who had always had my back. But then I'd see Amanda, and everything else would fade away. She had a hold on me, like a vice grip around my heart, and I was powerless to break free. It was as if she had become my addiction, and I was spiraling deeper into this secret life we were leading. We began to get more reckless. There were stolen kisses behind closed doors, whispered conversations that took on a dangerous tone, and late-night rendezvous that left us breathless and panicked. I could feel my life unraveling bit by bit, the threads of loyalty and morality snapping one by one. but I couldn't stop. There was something about Amanda that made everything else seem insignificant, and it was a high I wasn't willing to come down from. Then, one night, everything came crashing down. It was late, the kids were asleep, and Amanda had come over under the pretense of bringing me some leftovers. I should have known better than to let her stay. We ended up drinking wine in the kitchen, talking and laughing like there wasn't a care in the world. The conversation grew quieter, our voices softer, as if we were afraid the walls might be listening. As she was about to leave, I pulled her in for a kiss, and this time, it wasn't a fleeting peck. It was intense, desperate, like we both knew we were running out of time. That's when my sister Ashley walked in. The look in her eyes was enough to make my blood run cold. She stood there, frozen, her face a mask of shock and something else, something like betrayal. Her gaze flicked between Amanda and me, like she was piecing together a puzzle she didn't want to solve. She didn't say a word, she just turned and walked out. In that moment, everything we'd been doing hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just a harmless fling or some passing attraction. It was a ticking time bomb that had just exploded, and I knew there was no putting it back together. The fallout was immediate. Ashley confronted me the next day, her eyes red from tears and her voice trembling with rage. She didn't know if she should tell Ethan or not, but she made it clear she wouldn't cover for us. The guilt was suffocating. I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at the wreckage below, knowing I'd jumped without a parachute. My relationship with Ashley had always been close, but now there was a fracture between us that seemed impossible to mend. I could see the disappointment in her eyes, feel the weight of her judgment every time she looked at me. It was like she couldn't even recognize the person I had become. But Amanda, she didn't seem to care. If anything, she seemed more drawn to the chaos, more alive in the destruction. She messaged me that morning, teasing me about the kiss, saying how thrilling it was that Ashley had almost caught us before. I knew then that this wasn't just some reckless affair for her. It was a twisted game, and she was willing to drag me down with her if it meant keeping the thrill alive. It was as though the more dangerous things became, the more intoxicating it was for her. It scared me how much I was willing to go along with it, how easily I let myself be pulled back into the fire, knowing full well it would burn me alive. For months, we continued sneaking around, hiding in plain sight. We'd take the kids out, meet up in the middle of the night, even steal moments at family gatherings. It was exhausting, constantly looking over our shoulders, constantly wondering if Ethan knew more than he was letting on. The anxiety of getting caught added a dark thrill to it, sure, but there was a shadow growing inside me, this gnawing guilt that kept me awake at night, my mind racing with all the ways this could end. I'd catch glimpses of Ethan and feel a pang of shame, knowing that I was betraying him every time I looked at his wife the way I did. And then, inevitably, it all came crashing down. Ethan called me late one night, his voice eerily calm. "We need to talk," he said, and I knew, deep down, that the moment I'd been dreading had finally arrived. The facade was about to crumble, and all I could do was brace myself for the fallout. I drove to his place, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I didn't know what to expect, a confrontation, a fight, maybe even a complete unraveling of everything we'd built as brothers. What I wasn't prepared for was the look on his face, utter disappointment. He didn't yell, didn't demand explanations. He just stared at me with this hollow expression like he was staring at a stranger.